Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The dental office where I worked part-time had just cut my hours again, and I sat in my car during lunch break staring at the final notice from the power company, trying not to cry. Being a single mom to Lily, my 6-year-old, meant I couldn't afford to fall apart, not when she needed stability more than anything after the divorce that had cleaned me out completely 8 months earlier. Every paycheck disappeared before it even hit my account. Rent, groceries, her asthma medication that insurance barely covered, the after-school program I couldn't pull her from because I needed those extra hours to work. I'd already sold everything worth selling, had swallowed my pride and asked my parents for help until they couldn't give anymore, had maxed out credit cards I'd never be able to pay back. That afternoon, sitting in that stuffy car with the windows cracked because I couldn't waste gas running the AC, I finally opened the link my coworker Jasmine had texted me weeks earlier. She'd called it a sugar baby website, had sworn her cousin made enough in 3 months to pay off her student loans, and though everything in me screamed this was wrong, dangerous, degrading, I kept thinking about Lily's disappointed face when I told her we couldn't afford new school shoes yet. Spent a week just staring at the blank profile page before finally filling it out one night, after Lily had fallen asleep clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit, the one with the missing eye she refused to let me replace. The photos I uploaded were modest, just me in regular clothes. Nothing provocative because I told myself I was looking for financial help, not selling my body. There was a difference. There had to be a difference. Within days, my inbox filled with messages that ranged from disgusting to desperate. Married men sending explicit photos, college kids pretending to be rich, obvious scammers promising thousands for just my bank details. I was about to delete the whole account when Gregory's message appeared. Properly punctuated, respectful, asking if I'd like to meet for lunch at Bella Nova, this Italian place downtown I'd only ever walked past. His profile showed a professional headshot, corporate-looking, the kind of photo you'd see on a company website, and he claimed to be a venture capitalist who traveled frequently for work. Something about the formality of his approach made me feel less like I was doing something seedy, more like this was just a business arrangement between adults. So I agreed to meet him that Saturday while Lily was at her father's for his weekend visitation. Gregory looked exactly like his photo, maybe even better. Early 40s, silver streaks through dark hair that was perfectly styled, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He stood when I approached the table, pulled out my chair, and immediately handed me a menu while mentioning he'd already ordered us a bottle of wine, but I should feel free to get whatever I wanted. Before our appetizers arrived, he placed a thick envelope beside my water glass, said it was to help with whatever was most pressing, no strings attached, just one parent helping another. Inside was $3,000 in hundreds, crisp and new like they'd come straight from the bank. I tried to push it back, told him we hadn't discussed any arrangement yet, but he waved me off and said consider it a consultation fee, that he understood the courage it took for me to even show up. We talked through lunch about normal things. He asked about Lily's favorite subjects in school, shared stories about his teenage nephew who lived in Seattle, mentioned his ex-wife had custody of their son, but that the boy was in college now studying engineering. The arrangement he proposed seemed almost too good to be real. $5,000 a month deposited directly into my account, plus he'd cover any emergency expenses that came up. All he wanted was dinner twice a week, and the occasional event where he needed a +1. He stressed repeatedly that he wasn't looking for anything physical, that he traveled so much for work he just wanted companionship when he was in town, someone intelligent to talk to who wasn't part of his corporate world. The relief I felt was physical, like someone had lifted a boulder off my chest, and I agreed immediately, probably too eagerly, but he just smiled and ordered dessert to celebrate our partnership. That first month was exactly what he'd promised. Dinners at quiet restaurants where we talked about books and movies, one charity gala where I wore a dress he'd sent to my apartment, and the money appearing in my account like clockwork every 2 weeks. He never tried to kiss me, never made inappropriate comments, never even asked to come inside when he dropped me off, just waited in his black Audi until I was safely through my front door before driving away. The only strange thing, and I barely noticed it at first, was his scheduling quirk. He would only meet me after 8 p.m., always insisting it had to be when Lily was already asleep. He said he didn't want to complicate things, that keeping our arrangement separate from my parenting was healthier for everyone involved, which made sense to me at the time. I'd put Lily to bed by 7:30, wait for the babysitter to arrive, then meet Gregory wherever he'd chosen for the evening. He knew so much about children, would ask specific questions about Lily's development, her favorite foods, whether she was hitting her milestones properly, if she had any allergies or medical conditions I worried about. I thought it was sweet how interested he was in my life as a mother, how he'd light up when I showed him photos of her at the school play dressed as a sunflower, or videos of her losing her first tooth. He even started sending extra money specifically for her. Ballet lessons, new clothes, a tablet for educational games, always with notes saying every child deserved these opportunities. By the second month, little things started adding up in ways that made my chest tight with unease, though I kept dismissing them as paranoia. The babysitter mentioned once that she thought she'd heard someone walking around outside while I was gone, but when she looked, no one was there. Lily started talking about a nice man who waved at her from across the playground, but she couldn't describe him beyond saying he dressed like the dads at pickup time. Then there were the gifts that would appear. A new doll on our doorstep with no delivery label, a music box playing a lullaby I'd never heard, children's books that would show up in Lily's room that I didn't remember buying. Gregory always had explanations when I mentioned these things. Probably Amazon mixing up deliveries, maybe her father dropping things off. Kids imagine things all the time. He'd change the subject to ask what Lily's bedtime routine was like, if she was a heavy sleeper, whether she ever woke up in the middle of the night, and stupid me, I answered everything because I thought he was just being thoughtful. Last Friday was when everything went to hell, though it started like any other night we'd planned to meet. I'd given Lily her bath, read her 3 stories from her favorite book about a brave little mouse, and tucked her in with Mr. Bunny, making sure her nightlight was positioned just right so the stars it projected covered the ceiling completely. She'd been extra clingy that evening, kept asking me to check her closet twice, said she felt like someone had been in her room, but I figured she was just overtired from field day at school. I kissed her forehead, told her I'd be in the living room all night working on my computer, which was technically true since the babysitter would be using my laptop while I was gone. The babysitter called to cancel at the last minute. Her car had broken down, but I didn't want to cancel on Gregory since he'd already made reservations at this new French place that had a 3-week wait list. I figured Lily would sleep through the night like she always did, and I'd only be gone 2 hours tops, so I set up the baby monitor app on my phone and slipped out once I was sure she was deeply asleep. Dinner with Gregory felt different from the start. He kept checking his phone, barely touched his food, and his questions were more invasive than usual. He wanted to know if I'd ever had Lily tested for her IQ, if she'd shown any special talents, whether she remembered her dreams in detail. When I tried to change the subject, he grabbed my wrist, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to make me stop mid-sentence, and said we needed to leave right now, that he'd settle the bill later. In the car, he was silent, driving faster than usual, taking turns that weren't heading toward my apartment. I kept checking the baby monitor app on my phone, watching Lily sleep peacefully in the green-tinted night vision, until we pulled up to my building anyway, just from a different direction. He said he wanted to come up just for a few minutes, that there was something important we needed to discuss about our arrangement. Everything in my gut screamed no, but he was already out of the car, already at my building's entrance, already typing in the door code that I'd never given him. I ran after him, my heels clicking against the lobby tile, trying to keep my voice calm as I told him we could talk tomorrow, that I was tired, that I needed to check on Lily. He didn't respond, just walked straight to the elevator and pressed the button for my floor. The 4th floor, which I'd also never told him. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs, but I kept telling myself, maybe the doorman had mentioned it, maybe he'd seen it on a package delivery, maybe there was an explanation that didn't involve him stalking us. The hallway to my apartment felt endless, each step echoing like a countdown, and when we reached my door, he stood aside and waited for me to unlock it, his face completely blank, no trace of the charming man who'd taken me to lunch all those weeks ago. I fumbled with my keys, dropped them twice, my fingers numb with dread, and when I finally got the door open, the apartment was dark except for the glow from Lily's nightlight down the hall. I flipped on the living room light, turned to tell Gregory he needed to leave, and that's when I saw he wasn't behind me anymore. He was already in my apartment, had somehow moved past me in those few seconds, and he was sitting in the dark corner of the living room where I usually put Lily's toy basket. The shadows cut across his face in sharp angles, and in his hands, God, in his hands he was holding Mr. Bunny, Lily's special rabbit, the one she couldn't sleep without, the one that should have been in her bed with her right now. He turned it over slowly, examining the missing eye, running his fingers along the worn fur where Lily held it every night, and when he finally looked up at me, his expression was completely serene, like this was the most natural thing in the world. "She has excellent taste in companions," he said quietly, his voice different now, softer but somehow more frightening. "I've been watching her sleep sometimes, when you're in the shower or distracted with your phone. She looks so peaceful, doesn't she? Like a little angel. I've been thinking about what kind of father I'd be to a child like that." The room tilted, my vision blurred at the edges, and I gripped the door frame to keep from collapsing as the full weight of what he was saying crashed into me. Every maternal instinct in my body ignited at once, burning away the fear and replacing it with something primal and violent. I grabbed the heavy glass vase from the entry table, the one my mother had given me as a housewarming gift, and before Gregory could stand up, I brought it down on his head with every ounce of strength I had. The sound it made was wet and horrible, like dropping a watermelon on concrete, and he slumped forward, blood immediately pooling on my beige carpet. I didn't wait to see if he'd get up. I ran to Lily's room, scooped her out of bed while she was still drowsy and confused, grabbed my car keys and phone, and got out of there. In the elevator, Lily kept asking why we were leaving. Where was Mr. Bunny? Why was I crying? And I just held her tighter, told her we were going on an adventure to Grandma's house. I called 911 from the car, my voice shaking so badly the dispatcher had to ask me to repeat everything twice, and then I drove straight to my parents' house 2 hours away, checking the rearview mirror constantly, expecting to see his black Audi following us. The police found Gregory unconscious but alive in my apartment, along with something that still makes me sick to think about, a rental agreement for the vacant apartment directly above mine, dated 3 weeks before we'd even met on that website. The detectives showed me photos they'd found on his laptop, hundreds of pictures of Lily at the playground, at school pickup, through our apartment windows, even some from inside her room while she slept, that sick bastard standing over her bed like some kind of monster from a nightmare. They found journals where he'd written detailed fantasies about becoming her stepfather, about how he'd carefully selected us after watching several single mothers, chose me because I was desperate enough to ignore red flags, because Lily was the right age, the right temperament, the right everything for what he wanted. He's in prison now, took a plea deal for 15 years, and we've moved 3 states away, changed our last name, started over completely. Lily doesn't remember much, thank God, just occasionally asks about Mr. Bunny, and I tell her he went on his own adventure. I still wake up at night sometimes, convinced I can hear footsteps above us, but it's just the normal sounds of apartment living, not a predator mapping out our lives, waiting for the perfect moment to insert himself into our world. My student loans had hit $40,000 by the time Robert messaged me on that website. 23 years old with a business degree that got me nothing but a barista job, barely covering rent on a studio apartment. 4 months into our arrangement, everything seemed perfect. He was 52, owned several tech companies, needed someone for dinners and events maybe twice a month. 2,000 after each date, always respectful, never pushing boundaries. Early October, he invited me to his lake house for a weekend to discuss something more permanent, maybe paying off my loans entirely. We drove 3 hours north of Chicago, way up into Wisconsin, where the trees were already turning gold and orange. He kept describing the place during the drive: private beach, boat dock, wine cellar he'd had specially built. Robert picked me up in his silver Mercedes on a Friday afternoon, and honestly, excitement was all I felt about the whole weekend ahead. He'd shown me photos of the cabin before. Though calling it a cabin was ridiculous, the place looked massive with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the water. My suitcase had my best outfits, thinking we might hit some fancy restaurants nearby. Something seemed different about him though, more talkative than usual, his fingers drumming constantly on the steering wheel. When we finally turned off the main highway onto a dirt road, then another dirt road, then a private drive that went on forever through thick woods, my phone lost signal completely. Robert noticed me checking it and laughed, saying that was the best part about the place. Total disconnection from the world. No distractions, just us and nature. When we pulled up to the house, my jaw literally dropped. Glass and wood and stone, 3 stories built into the hillside, with a deck that wrapped around the entire second floor. Robert grabbed my suitcase before I could reach for it, which was normal for him, always the gentleman. Inside, everything was modern and expensive. Marble countertops, leather furniture. One of those kitchens that looked like it belonged in a magazine. He gave me the tour, pointing out the heated floors, the jacuzzi on the deck, the path down to the private dock. My room was on the 3rd floor, huge with its own bathroom and a view of the lake that went on forever. He put my suitcase in what looked like a closet, saying he'd had it converted to a special storage area with climate control for guests' belongings. Said the humidity from the lake could damage leather and certain fabrics. Then he closed it with this electronic keypad lock, punching in numbers too fast for me to catch. "Don't worry about unpacking now," he said when I reached for the closet door. "Let's have some wine first, watch the sunset. You can settle in later." His hand on my lower back guided me toward the stairs, firm but not aggressive. Down in the kitchen, he opened a bottle of something French and expensive, while I stood at those massive windows watching the sun paint everything gold. He handed me a glass, then raised his own for a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, maintaining eye contact longer than usual. After the second glass, my head felt fuzzy, which was weird because I could usually handle wine pretty well. Robert suggested I might want to rest before dinner, said he'd made reservations at a place about 20 minutes away. But when I went back upstairs to change, the keypad on the closet wouldn't respond to any combination I tried. Robert appeared in my doorway while I was pressing random numbers, leaning against the frame with his wine glass still in hand. "Problem?" he asked, and something about his tone made my chest tighten. I explained I needed to change for dinner, kept my voice light, and laughed about forgetting the code already. He walked over slowly, took his time punching in the numbers while his body blocked my view. "There you go," he said, opening it just wide enough to pull out one dress, not the one I wanted, and then closing it again before I could grab anything else. "This one will be perfect for tonight," he said, holding up a red dress I'd never worn for him before, something lower cut than I usually chose for our dates. When I reached for the closet door again, he stepped between me and it. "Actually, there's been a change of plans. The restaurant called about some kitchen issue. We'll just eat here instead." My phone was in that closet, in my purse, along with my wallet, my car keys, everything except the makeup bag I'd carried in separately. I tried to stay calm, suggested maybe we could try another restaurant, even offered to look up places on my phone. "Your phone won't work here anyway," Robert said, walking toward my bedroom door. "Why don't you freshen up, put on the dress, and meet me downstairs in an hour? I'll cook something special." He paused at the doorway, turned back with an expression I'd never seen before. Possessive, hungry, calculating. And Anna, don't bother trying the keypad again. It only works with my thumbprint now. The door clicked shut behind him, and I heard something that made my whole body go rigid. The unmistakable sound of a lock turning from the outside. For maybe 10 minutes, I just stood there trying to process what was happening. Then survival mode kicked in. The windows had these designer locks that needed a special key. The bathroom window was too small to fit through, just a narrow thing for ventilation. I tried the bedroom door handle carefully, quietly, definitely locked from outside. The red dress lay on the bed where Robert had tossed it, and looking at it made me want to throw up. Instead, I went through every drawer, every cabinet, searching for anything useful. Found nothing but fresh towels and those little hotel soaps. From my window, I could see the lake stretching out in both directions. No other houses visible, no boats, nothing but water and trees. The sun was getting lower, maybe 2 hours until dark. I put on the dress because I needed him to think I was playing along, needed time to figure something out. At exactly 1 hour, the lock clicked open, and Robert stood there, now wearing a different shirt, his hair freshly combed. "Beautiful," he said, looking me up and down in a way that made my skin prickle. He held out his hand, waited until I took it, then led me downstairs to a dining room I hadn't noticed during the tour. Candles everywhere, classical music playing, 2 place settings at a long table. He pulled out my chair, his hands lingering on my shoulders as I sat down. "I've been planning this weekend for months," he said, pouring more wine despite my untouched glass from earlier. "You're special, Anna. Different from the others. They always disappointed me in the end, but you understand what this is about. The transaction, the honesty of it." He set a plate in front of me. Steak, bloody, even though he knew I liked mine well done. "Eat," he said, not a request, and sat across from me with his own plate. Every bite felt like swallowing concrete, but I forced myself to cut the meat, to chew, to swallow. Robert watched every movement, sipping his wine, occasionally reaching across to touch my hand. "Tell me," he said suddenly, "what did you think would happen this weekend? Really think?" I gave him the answer he wanted to hear, that I'd hoped we could take things to the next level, that I was grateful for his generosity. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Honesty, Anna. I thought we had that." He stood up, walked around the table to stand behind my chair. His hands settled on my shoulders, thumbs pressing into the base of my neck. "You thought you'd get a big payday, maybe 50,000, 100, enough to disappear, start fresh somewhere?" His grip tightened slightly. "But that's not how this works. When I pay off your debts, you become mine, exclusively, permanently. Here at the lake house where no one will bother us." "I need to use the bathroom," I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. He released my shoulders, stepped back to let me stand. "Down the hall, second door," he said, then grabbed my wrist as I passed. "Don't do anything stupid, Anna. There's nowhere to go. The nearest neighbor is 8 miles through forest. The lake is 43 degrees this time of year. Hypothermia sets in within minutes. Your phone, your keys, your ID, all locked away safe. Just accept this." In the bathroom, I locked the door and ran the water to cover any noise. The window was painted shut, I discovered. Probably had been for years. The medicine cabinet had nothing useful, just basic toiletries and some prescription bottles with Robert's name. Under the sink, behind old cleaning supplies, my fingers found something that made my heart race. A cell phone, ancient, probably a flip phone from years ago. The battery was dead, but the charger was coiled up next to it, probably forgotten by some contractor or previous guest. I plugged it in behind the toilet where it couldn't be seen from the door, turned off the water, flushed for show, and went back out. Robert was waiting in the hallway, had moved from the dining room without making a sound. "Feeling better?" he asked, and guided me to the living room where he'd lit a fire. He positioned me on the couch, sat too close, his arm across the back of the cushions behind me. For 2 hours he talked about his vision, how I'd live here full-time, how he'd visit on weekends, how perfect it would all be. His hand played with my hair while he spoke, twirling strands around his fingers. Around 11, he finally said I must be tired, walked me back upstairs. "Get some rest," he said at my bedroom door. "Tomorrow we'll go out on the boat, just the two of us. The lake is beautiful in the morning." The lock clicked again after he left. I waited until 3 a.m., listening for any movement in the house. Nothing. Back in the bathroom, the phone had charged enough to power on. 1 bar of signal, barely there, flickering in and out. My fingers shook as I dialed 911. It rang once, twice, then connected. 911, what's your emergency? I whispered everything as fast as I could. Kidnapped, lake house in Wisconsin, 3 hours north of Chicago, off Highway 47, held against my will. The dispatcher kept asking for an exact address, but I didn't know it. I described the private road, the silver Mercedes, Robert's full name from those prescription bottles. She said they'd trace the call, send units to check all lake properties in the area. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, slow, they stopped right outside the bathroom door. The handle turned. "Anna?" Robert's voice was calm, which was somehow worse than anger. "What are you doing in there at 3 in the morning?" I shoved the phone under towels beneath the sink, praying it wouldn't make noise, and flushed the toilet. "Sorry," I called out, making my voice groggy. Wasn't feeling well. That wine hit me hard. I opened the door to find him fully dressed, wide awake like he'd been waiting. He studied my face for a long moment, then pushed past me into the bathroom. He looked around, behind the shower curtain, in the medicine cabinet under the sink. His hand stopped inches from the towels hiding the phone. Then he straightened up, turned to face me. "If you're sick, you should have told me. I have medicine in my room." He took my arm, not gently, and walked me back to my bedroom. "Try to sleep," he said. "And Anna? Next time you need the bathroom at night, knock on my door first. I'll escort you." This time, when he locked me in, I heard him drag something heavy in front of the door, furniture scraping against wood. Dawn came slowly, gray light creeping across the lake. Around 7, I heard sirens in the distance, getting closer. Robert's footsteps pounded up the stairs and the door flew open. He'd removed whatever he'd used to block it. "Get dressed, now. Jeans and a sweater, something casual." His face was composed, but his eyes were wild. "We're going for a boat ride, just like I promised." When I hesitated, he grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise. "The police are coming because some neighbor reported a break-in down the shore. They're checking all the properties. You're going to smile, wave, be the perfect girlfriend enjoying a weekend getaway. One wrong word, one wrong look, and I'll tell them you're here for prostitution, that you tried to steal from me. Who do you think they'll believe? The respected businessman or the girl from the Sugar Daddy website?" He dragged me downstairs, out to the dock where a speedboat waited. But as he fumbled with the keys, 3 police cars pulled into the driveway. Officers already getting out. "Remember what I said," Robert whispered, his hand like a vice on my wrist. But I was done being scared. As the first officer approached the dock, I yanked my arm free and screamed, "Help me, he's keeping me prisoner. My name is Anna Fitzgerald. I called 911 from a hidden phone." Robert lunged for me, but 2 officers were already running toward us. He tried to play it cool, laughing, saying I was having some kind of episode, that we'd been drinking. But then more officers came from the house, one holding the old flip phone in an evidence bag, another carrying my purse and phone from the locked closet they'd broken open. The thumbprint lock, the bedroom door that locked from outside, my belongings secured away. It all painted a picture Robert couldn't talk his way out of. The female officer who questioned me separately found the bruises on my arm, took photos, took my statement about everything from the drugged wine to the threats. Robert kept insisting it was a misunderstanding, a game gone wrong, that I'd agreed to everything. They arrested him right there on his own dock, those expensive boat shoes slipping on the wet wood as they cuffed him. They found evidence of 2 other girls in his computer, apparently. Previous arrangements that had ended when the women mysteriously disappeared from social media, stopped contacting their families. One from 2017, another from early 2022. The prosecutors think they left the country to escape him, but they're still investigating. Robert got 11 years. Kidnapping, false imprisonment, assault. His lawyers tried to make me look like a willing participant who got cold feet, brought up the website, the money, the 4 months of dates. But that 911 call saved me. The dispatcher had recorded everything, including Robert trying to break down the bathroom door in the background. I still have nightmares about that weekend, about what would have happened if that old phone hadn't been there. I don't use dating apps anymore, definitely don't do arrangements. Got a normal job at a marketing firm, paying off my loans the slow way. Sometimes I Google Robert's name, just to make sure he's still locked up. 7 more years to go. The rent was 3 months overdue when I finally made the decision that changed everything. I was 26, living in Portland, working 2 jobs that barely covered groceries, let alone the mounting bills that kept sliding under my door. My roommate had bailed 2 months earlier, leaving me with a lease I couldn't afford and a pride I couldn't swallow. That Wednesday afternoon in November, sitting in my car during my lunch break from the diner, scrolling through my phone with greasy fingers that smelled like bacon and coffee, I found the website. It promised mutually beneficial arrangements between successful gentlemen and ambitious women. The testimonials showed girls my age talking about paid-off student loans, shopping sprees, monthly allowances that exceeded what I made in 3 months. I remember staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror, at the dark circles under my eyes, at the uniform shirt with the permanent coffee stain near the collar, and thinking maybe I deserved better than this endless grind. His profile stood out immediately, not because of the usual flashy photos or bragging about yacht parties, but because of how ordinary he seemed. Nathan called himself a discreet professional who valued privacy above all else. His message was polite, almost formal, suggesting we meet at the Marriott downtown for coffee in their lobby. He was 43, divorced, owned several medical supply companies across the Pacific Northwest. The photo showed a clean-shaven man with graying temples and the kind of boring, expensive clothes that wealthy people wear when they don't want attention. That first meeting lasted exactly 1 hour. He ordered black coffee, asked about my situation without judgment, and laid out terms like he was negotiating a business contract. $3,000 a month for weekly meetings, always at hotels. He traveled constantly for work, he explained, and found hotels more convenient than maintaining an apartment. He had specific requirements. I needed to dress professionally, but not provocatively, arrive exactly on time, and most importantly, never discuss our arrangement with anyone. The way he counted out $500 bills as a good faith advance right there at the table, sliding them across in a leather portfolio like we were closing a real estate deal, made everything feel legitimate, almost respectable. The first 2 months were exactly what he promised. Every Friday at 4 o'clock, I'd walk into whatever upscale hotel he'd chosen. The Hilton, the Sheraton, always somewhere with valet parking and marble lobbies. He'd text me the room number an hour before, always a suite on a high floor. We'd talk about my week while he poured wine I pretended to know the names of. Then we'd have sex that was mechanical but not unpleasant, like a dental cleaning you schedule twice a year. He never stayed the night, always leaving by 7 with an envelope on the nightstand containing exactly $750 in cash. I told myself it was just another job, easier than scrubbing tables or pretending to laugh at customers' jokes. The money transformed my life. I caught up on rent, fixed my car, even started a savings account for the first time since college. My mom noticed I seemed less stressed during our weekly phone calls, and I made up stories about getting promoted at the diner. The change started on a Friday in January, our 9th meeting. Nathan had booked a corner suite at the Regency, fancier than usual, with a separate living room and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. He seemed different that day, checking his phone constantly, getting up to peer through the peephole whenever someone walked past in the hallway. When I asked if everything was okay, he smiled in this weird, tight way and said his business partners were in town for a conference. That should have been my first real warning. But the envelope that night had an extra $500 with a sticky note that said, "For being patient with my mood." I remember standing in the hotel bathroom afterward, counting the bills twice, thinking how that extra money meant I could finally get my wisdom teeth removed. While I was getting dressed, I noticed his laptop was open on the desk, showing what looked like multiple video feeds, just black squares with timestamps at the bottom. When he saw me looking, he snapped it shut so fast he almost caught his fingers, then made some joke about boring security footage from his warehouses. 2 weeks later, everything unraveled. Nathan had texted me about meeting at the Grandview Hotel, a place we'd never been before. The suite was massive, almost apartment-sized, with a kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and this strange industrial feel, exposed brick walls and metal fixtures that seemed more like a converted loft than a hotel. Nathan was already there when I arrived, sitting on the leather couch with a glass of whiskey, wearing the same navy suit he always wore on Fridays. But something was different about the room's layout. There were mirrors everywhere, not just the normal bedroom and bathroom ones, but decorative mirrors on the walls, a mirrored coffee table, even mirror tiles above the bed that I'd never seen in any hotel before. He kept talking about how this was their premium designer suite, how he'd pulled strings to get it. While he was in the bathroom, I went to plug in my phone and noticed the outlet near the bed was brand new, like it had just been installed. The paint around it was still slightly tacky, and there was drywall dust on the carpet underneath that housekeeping had missed. I don't know what made me look closer at that outlet. Maybe just boredom, or that nagging feeling you get when small details don't add up. The faceplate was slightly crooked, and when I touched it, it shifted. Behind it, barely visible through the screw hole, was a tiny red light, no bigger than a pinhead. My chest got tight and I started checking the other outlets, the smoke detector, the air vents. The smoke detector had a small black dot in the center that didn't match the model. I knew because my apartment had the same brand. The lamp on the nightstand had a tiny hole drilled in its base, perfectly positioned toward the bed. Even the digital clock had this weird sheen on its display that looked wrong. I found 7 cameras in 10 minutes, and those were just the obvious ones. My phone started recording everything as I walked around the room, documenting each location, trying to keep my breathing steady while Nathan sang off-key in the shower. The mirror above the bed wasn't even a real mirror. When I stood at an angle, I could see through it slightly, like those interrogation rooms in cop shows. There was definitely a room on the other side. The bathroom door opened and Nathan emerged in a hotel robe, still drying his hair with a towel. I was sitting on the couch, fully dressed, my purse clutched in my lap with my phone hidden inside, still recording. He asked why I wasn't comfortable yet, and I told him I wasn't feeling well. Maybe food poisoning from lunch. The lie came out smooth, practiced, like I'd been rehearsing it my whole life. He walked over and put his hand on my forehead, checking for a fever, and his fingers felt like ice against my skin. That's when I heard it, a muffled cough from somewhere that wasn't our suite. Nathan's eyes flicked toward the wall with the fake mirror, just for a second, but long enough for me to know he'd heard it too. He started insisting I should lie down, that he had some antacids in his briefcase, his voice getting this strange edge like he was reading from a script he'd memorized. I stood up, said I needed to go home, that I'd make it up to him next week. His whole demeanor shifted. The polite, boring businessman mask slipped, and underneath was something that made my knees weak. He positioned himself between me and the door, not threatening exactly, but deliberate, calculated. "You can't leave yet," he said, and his voice had dropped an octave, all traces of warmth gone. "My associates need to discuss some adjustments to our arrangement." The word associates hit me like cold water, and suddenly the cough from behind the mirror made perfect sense. He walked to the fake mirror and knocked on it 3 times, a clear signal. I heard movement from the other side, chairs scraping, footsteps, multiple voices talking in low tones. Nathan pulled out his phone and started scrolling through something, then turned the screen toward me. It was a video of me from 3 weeks ago, undressing in a different hotel room, shot from an angle I now realized matched a wall sconce I'd never paid attention to. He had dozens of thumbnails, all different dates, all me. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, sitting down across from me like we were negotiating a raise. "The monthly amount stays the same, but you'll be seeing a few of my associates too. Nothing you haven't done before, just a wider client base. If you refuse, these videos find their way to interesting places. Your mother's Facebook, your employer, that community college where you're taking night classes." He knew about the night classes. I'd never told him about those. My throat felt like someone was squeezing it, and I could hear my pulse in my ears as the voices behind the mirror got louder, discussing me like I was a business acquisition they were evaluating. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking so bad I had to grip the arm of the couch. "I need to use the bathroom," I said, surprised at how calm my voice sounded. Nathan looked annoyed but nodded, probably figuring I had nowhere to go from there. In the bathroom, I locked the door and immediately opened my phone. My fingers kept missing the buttons as I tried to think through my options. Calling 911 felt impossible. What would I say? That I was a sex worker being blackmailed? I could already imagine the judgment, the questions, my mother finding out anyway. Then I remembered something from a self-defense class I'd taken in college. Sometimes the best weapon is unexpected chaos. I turned on the sync full blast, then started my live stream on Instagram. I had maybe 300 followers, mostly old friends and co-workers, but it was better than nothing. "Hey everyone," I whispered to the camera. "I'm at the Grandview Hotel, room 1247. If something happens to me, Nathan Carlisle from MedTech Solutions is responsible. There are cameras hidden in the rooms here, and there are men watching from room 1248 or 1249. I sent the same message to my roommate from 2 months ago, my sister in Denver, even my ex-boyfriend who still had me on Facebook. Then I flushed the toilet, ran the shower, and screamed, 'Fire!' at the top of my lungs. The thing about yelling fire in a hotel is that people react faster than if you yell, 'Help!' I kept screaming it over and over, while pounding on the bathroom door from the inside. Within seconds, I heard commotion in the hallway. Doors opening, voices asking what was happening, someone yelling about calling the front desk. Nathan was pounding on the bathroom door, trying to shush me, but I just screamed louder, throwing in smoke inhalation coughs for effect. I heard the suite's main door slam open and multiple footsteps rushing out, the associates making their escape. Nathan's voice got desperate, offering me $10,000 to shut up, $20,000, please just stop. Then came the beautiful sound of the hotel's fire alarm, triggered by someone in the hall. The sprinklers didn't go off, but the piercing siren meant everyone had to evacuate. I unlocked the bathroom door and pushed past Nathan, who was frantically trying to pack his laptop. The hallway was full of confused guests in various states of undress, and I blended right in with the crowd heading for the stairs. A hotel security guard was directing traffic, and I made sure to stumble near him, grabbing his arm. "That man," I said loudly, pointing at Nathan, who'd just emerged with his briefcase, "has hidden cameras in room 1247. He's been recording guests." The guard's expression changed immediately, and he spoke into his radio while moving toward Nathan. The next hour was a blur of flashing lights and questions. The fire department cleared the building while police took statements in the lobby. Nathan tried to leave, but hotel security held him until the cops arrived. I showed them my phone recording of all the hidden cameras, and they found the setup in room 1248. 3 laptops, recording equipment, and a hole cut in the adjoining wall behind what looked like a painting. The room was registered to a fake company, but the credit card traced back to Nathan's business. 2 of his associates were caught in the parking garage trying to load equipment into a van. Turned out this wasn't their first setup. The detective who interviewed me said they'd been investigating similar complaints from other hotels in the area, but no one had ever caught them in the act before. My Instagram Live had been screen recorded by dozens of people, including a journalist from the local news who'd gone to high school with me. Nathan's lawyer showed up within an hour, but the damage was done. The police had the equipment, the hotel had security footage of Nathan entering both rooms, and my video clearly showed the cameras before anyone could remove them. I never found out exactly what happened with the criminal case. I stopped following the news after the first few weeks because seeing Nathan's face made me physically ill. I know he was charged with multiple counts of voyeurism and attempted extortion. His medical supply companies got investigated, and there were rumors about federal charges related to interstate trafficking of the recordings. I had to change my phone number 3 times because reporters wouldn't stop calling, wanting to hear about the honey trap hotel scheme as they'd branded it. The money I'd saved from those months with Nathan went to therapy and a lawyer who made sure my name stayed out of most of the coverage. I moved back in with my sister in Denver, got a boring office job that barely pays anything but feels clean in a way I can't explain. Sometimes I wake up at 4 a.m. convinced there's a red light blinking somewhere in my room, and I have to check every outlet, every smoke detector before I can fall back asleep. The detective called me 6 months later to say Nathan took a plea deal, 7 years, but probably out in 4 with good behavior. She also mentioned they'd found recordings of 14 other women, some going back 3 years. Most of them never knew they'd been filmed at all. I was the only one who caught them, she said, like I should be proud of that. I guess in a way I am, but mostly I just feel lucky that my instinct to cause chaos saved me from whatever they'd planned in that room. I still can't stay in hotels, and I cover my laptop camera with tape, but at least I can pay my rent without wondering what it's really costing me. February of this year found me 21 and drowning in debt at UC San Diego. Between tuition, rent for my shoebox apartment in Pacific Beach, and trying to survive on ramen and peanut butter sandwiches, money was beyond tight. Every shift at a campus coffee shop, every freshman I tutored in calculus, every twice-weekly plasma donation, it all went straight to keeping me housed and enrolled. My roommate Brad had bailed the month before, leaving me stuck with double rent payments, and eviction notices were starting to pile up under my door. A buddy named Kevin had been joking about these sugar dating apps for months, showing me profiles of older women offering cash for company. One desperate night at 2 a.m., after calculating that I had exactly $17 to last me 9 days, I downloaded one of those apps and started scrolling. Victoria Sterling's profile stopped me cold. 43, platinum blonde. Every photo showing her draped in designer clothes next to Bentleys or standing on marble terraces overlooking the ocean. Her message came through within an hour of me viewing her profile. Not the usual "hey cutie" garbage, but actual questions about my mechanical engineering courses, about the robotics project I'd mentioned in my bio. We went back and forth for a week and she knew her stuff. Turned out she'd invested in several tech startups and actually understood what I was studying. When she suggested dinner at the Grand Del Mar Resort that Friday, my gut told me something was different about this one. The menu prices online made my eyes water, but then she Venmo'd me $500 for gas and something appropriate to wear. I bought a decent shirt and slacks at Ross for $40, stuffed the rest in my emergency rent envelope, and drove my dying 2004 Corolla up to Carmel Valley, telling myself this was just dinner with an interesting older woman who happened to have money. She met me in the lobby wearing this deep purple dress that probably cost more than my entire year's tuition. Everything about Victoria screamed money, from her subtle diamond earrings to the way she carried herself, like she owned every room she walked into. Her perfume hit me before she even reached me, something complex and expensive that made the lobby smell like a garden in France. She kissed me on both cheeks, European style, and I caught the valet guys exchanging looks when she slipped her arm through mine. During dinner, she ordered for both of us in perfect French, chose a wine that cost $300 a bottle, and kept touching my hand while asking about my family, my dreams, my plans after graduation. She had this way of making intense eye contact, these green eyes that seemed to catalog every detail about me. Between the lobster thermidor and the chocolate soufflé, she mentioned she had a proposition that could solve all my financial problems. $10,000 a month, she said, swirling her wine glass like we were discussing the weather. All I want is your company 2 evenings a week. Dinners, events, sometimes traveling, nothing you're not comfortable with. My fork literally stopped halfway to my mouth. 10 grand would change everything. I could finish school without stress, maybe even help my mom with her medical bills. Victoria smiled at my obvious shock, reached into her Hermes bag, and pulled out an envelope. Inside was $2,000 in cash. "Consider this a signing bonus," she said. "My driver is outside. Why don't we go for a ride and discuss the details?" Red flags should have been going off, but all I could see was green. The color of money, the color of her eyes, the color of the escape route from my miserable financial situation. Her driver was this massive guy named Dimitri, probably 6'5", with a neck thicker than my thigh, and hands that could palm a basketball. He stood next to a black Mercedes S-Class, holding the door open without making eye contact. Victoria slid in first, patting the leather seat beside her, and I followed like a lamb to slaughter. The interior smelled like new money and her perfume, with blue LED lights running along the floor and a full bar built into the partition. She poured herself vodka from a crystal decanter while Dimitri pulled away from the resort, heading inland instead of back toward the coast. "I need you to understand something," Victoria said, her fingers tracing patterns on my knee. "This arrangement requires absolute discretion. Some of my business associates are very particular about privacy." We were 20 minutes into the drive, winding through dark hills I didn't recognize, when she pulled out an iPad and showed me photos. Me walking into the resort, me at the coffee shop on campus, me leaving the plasma center. My throat went completely dry seeing those pictures. "How long have you been watching me?" came out as barely a whisper. Victoria laughed, this tinkling sound that would have been charming if I wasn't suddenly terrified. "Oh, sweetheart, I don't watch. I research. I know about your mother's lupus diagnosis, your father walking out when you were 12, your full-ride scholarship that only covers tuition. I know you're brilliant but desperate, which makes you perfect." She swiped to a new photo. Me in my apartment, taken through my window. "Perfect for what?" I asked, already reaching for the door handle. That's when I heard the locks engage, that final electronic click that meant I wasn't going anywhere. Dimitri's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror for the first time, and he had this expression like a cat that had cornered a mouse. Victoria pulled out a different phone, started recording video, and said the words that made my entire body go cold. "Perfect for what we need you to do with Professor Morrison's daughter." Professor Morrison taught advanced thermodynamics, and his daughter Chloe was in my study group. Sweet girl, 19, always brought homemade cookies to our sessions. Victoria showed me another photo, Chloe laughing at some party, her arm around a guy I didn't recognize. "Her father owes some very important people a substantial amount of money," Victoria explained, her voice shifting from seductive to businesslike. "He's been uncooperative about paying. You're going to get close to Chloe, earn her trust, and bring her to a specific location when we tell you to." My stomach churned, and I actually thought I might throw up right there in that pristine Mercedes. "You're talking about kidnapping," I said, my voice cracking. Victoria's perfectly manicured nails dug into my thigh, hard enough to hurt through my cheap slacks. "We're talking about leverage. Nobody gets hurt if everyone cooperates. You'll receive your 10,000 monthly plus bonuses. Refuse, and those photos of you accepting money from me, getting into my car willingly, they tell a different story. Drug deal gone bad, maybe. Prostitution. Your scholarship disappears. Your mother's insurance mysteriously gets canceled. Dimitri had turned onto a dirt road, headlights cutting through absolute darkness. No other cars for miles. My phone had no signal. I'd been checking desperately every few seconds. Even better, Victoria continued, pulling out a folder with photocopies of my mom's medical records, her social security card, her work schedule at the grocery store in Chula Vista. Such a shame if something happened to her during one of those late shifts. Parking lots can be so dangerous. My whole body was trembling now, that kind of shaking that starts in your core and radiates outward. She had everything, every detail of my life, my mom's life. Probably even knew what size shoes I wore. The car finally stopped at what looked like an abandoned warehouse. one yellow light bulb hanging over a metal door. Two more men emerged from the shadows, both wearing suits despite the late hour, both with that same predatory patience Dimitri had. Victoria opened her door and gestured for me to follow. "Come inside. We have contracts to sign, videos to record. Do this right, and in 6 months you'll have enough money to disappear. Start fresh anywhere you want." Standing outside that warehouse, I made a split-second decision that probably saved my life. I stumbled getting out of the car, deliberately dropped to one knee like I was about to puke, and while everyone stepped back in disgust, I grabbed a handful of dirt and gravel. When Dimitri reached down to haul me up, I threw it straight in his eyes and bolted into the darkness. Behind me, Victoria screamed something in what sounded like Russian, and I heard car doors slamming, feet pounding on dirt. The desert around the warehouse was all scrub brush and rocks, and I ran blind, crashing through bushes that tore my shirt, stumbling over holes I couldn't see. A flashlight beam swept past my head, close enough that I could feel the heat from how close they were. I dropped behind a boulder, trying to control my breathing while my lungs burned for oxygen. Their voices carried in the still night air. They were spreading out, forming a grid pattern to flush me out. I knew they'd find me eventually if I stayed hidden, so I started moving again, keeping low, using shadows and terrain for cover. About a mile out, I nearly cried with relief when I saw headlights on a distant road. I had no idea where I was, but I ran toward those lights like my life depended on it, which it did. My legs were screaming, my fancy Ross shirt was shredded, and I could taste blood from where I'd bitten my tongue during a fall. The road turned out to be a small highway, and I literally threw myself in front of an approaching pickup truck, waving my arms like a madman. The driver, this older Mexican guy named Carlos, took one look at my destroyed clothes and terrified face and told me to get in. He didn't ask questions, just drove me straight to a police station in Escondido. I told the cops about the attempted kidnapping plot, gave them Victoria's name, the warehouse location, everything. They took my statement, but when they sent units to check it out, the warehouse was empty. No cars, no people, nothing but dust and old machinery. The dating app profile was gone. The Venmo payment came from an untraceable account, and Victoria Sterling didn't exist, at least not under that name. For weeks after that night, I lived in pure paranoia. I moved in with my cousin in La Mesa, changed my phone number, dropped out of Professor Morrison's class, and warned Chloe to be careful without giving specifics. The cops told me not to reveal details of an ongoing investigation. Every black Mercedes made my heart race. Every tall guy in a suit looked like Dimitri, and I started carrying pepper spray and a knife everywhere. My mom never knew how close she came to danger. I just told her I was staying with friends for a while. Then one morning about a month later, I woke up to find an envelope under my apartment door. Inside was a single photo, me at the police station that night, taken from across the street, and $5,000 in hundreds. No note, no threat, just the message that they knew where I'd gone and were choosing to let me walk away. I took it as a warning and a goodbye, grabbed my stuff, and transferred to Arizona State the next semester, changing my major to computer science so I'd never cross paths with anyone from the engineering department at UCSD again. Campus police eventually told me they'd found similar complaints from 2 other universities in California. Young, desperate male students approached by older women with incredible offers, though I was the only one who'd gotten far enough to see the warehouse. They suspected it was a human trafficking ring or an elaborate blackmail operation, targeting wealthy families through their kids. But without solid evidence or real names, the case went cold. I still get jumpy when unknown numbers call, still check exits whenever I enter a room, and definitely never touched a dating app again. Sometimes I wonder if Chloe's dad ever paid whatever he owed, if they found another desperate student to manipulate, if Victoria, or whatever her real name was, is still out there shopping for broke college kids. All I know is that I got lucky that night in the desert, and that $500 she sent me in the beginning, I donated every penny to a shelter for trafficking victims, trying to balance the karma of almost becoming a monster myself. Friday nights at the Velvet Room meant dealing with drunk executives and their endless corporate war stories. But the tips made it worth every forced smile. 26 years old, drowning in student debt, mixing overpriced cocktails for people who spent my monthly rent on a single dinner. That was my life when Veronica walked through those heavy glass doors. She had this way of moving through the crowd like everyone else was just furniture, heading straight for the far corner of my bar. Burgundy dress, diamond earrings that caught the amber lighting, and she ordered a Hendrick's martini with 3 olives, very dry, while sliding her black card across the mahogany counter before I even quoted the price. A week later, she returned at the exact same time, and something made me start preparing her drink the moment I saw her silhouette in the doorway. The smile she gave me when I placed it in front of her without being asked. That smile came with a $100 tip folded into a perfect square. Veronica owned commercial real estate, lots of it, scattered across 3 states like pieces on a Monopoly board she'd already won. 43, recently divorced with that specific kind of loneliness that expensive wine and designer handbags couldn't quite fill. She started as a Friday regular, then added Wednesdays, then Mondays, always claiming the same bar stool, always staying until my shift ended at 2 in the morning. The conversations shifted gradually, from casual small talk about the weather, to her asking if I'd ever been to Milan, if I liked my apartment, whether I was seeing anyone. Her perfume was distinctive, something with jasmine and sandalwood that would linger on the bar long after she left. The tips escalated too, 200 here, 300 there. Always in fresh bills she'd pull from a leather wallet that never seemed to empty, pressing them into my hand with her fingers lingering against my palm. Everything changed that night in early March when she waited until the lounge emptied out completely. Just her and me, and the soft jazz playing through the speakers. She asked if I'd ever considered a different arrangement, something more beneficial for both of us. Her proposal was straightforward. She'd pay my rent, clear my student loans, even lease me a car, and all I had to do was spend time with her outside of work. Not just dates, she clarified, but real time, answering her calls, joining her for weekend trips, being available when she needed company. The number she wrote on that cocktail napkin made my throat go dry. $10,000 a month plus expenses, my annual salary in 3 months. All cash, no questions, no strings except the ones she'd hold. I should have walked away right then. Should have recognized the hunger in her eyes wasn't just desire but something darker, more possessive. But I said yes. Of course I said yes. Within a week, my student loans vanished like they'd never existed, and I was driving a BMW she'd leased under her company's name. The arrangement seemed simple enough at first. Dinner twice a week, overnight stays at her penthouse on weekends, accompanying her to business events where she'd introduce me as her consultant, whatever that meant. She bought me suits from stores I'd only walked past before, watches that cost more than my parents' car, taught me about wine regions and which fork to use at restaurants where the menus didn't have prices. The sex was part of it, sure, but that almost seemed secondary to her real desire, which was ownership. She wanted to know where I was every hour, who I talked to, what I was thinking about when I wasn't with her. She installed some tracking app on the phone she bought me, said it was for safety, but we both knew what it really was. The problem started small, like cracks in glass before it shatters. One night at the lounge, a group of flight attendants came in for a bachelorette party, and one of them got flirty while ordering shots. Just harmless fun, the kind of banter that comes with the job, helps with tips. But Veronica was watching from her corner seat, and I saw her knuckles go white around her martini glass. Later that night, she showed up at my apartment unannounced, screaming about respect and boundaries, throwing a wine bottle that exploded against my kitchen wall like a burgundy firework. The next morning, she apologized with a Rolex and a weekend trip to Aspen, as if expensive gifts could erase the wine stains on my ceiling. That became our pattern, her explosive jealousy followed by lavish apologies, each cycle getting shorter, more intense. By May, she'd gotten me to quit the bartending job entirely, said she needed me available whenever she called. The money increased to $15,000 a month, enough that I convinced myself the isolation was temporary, just until I saved enough to start over somewhere else. But she had access to everything by then. My bank accounts, my social media, even my email passwords that she'd gotten during one of those nights when she mixed her Xanax with wine and threatened to hurt herself if I didn't prove I had nothing to hide. She knew about every text, every call, every LinkedIn message from former co-workers asking why I'd disappeared. My friend Jason tried to stage what he called an intervention, showed up at the penthouse one afternoon, but Veronica had the doorman remove him and then spent 3 hours interrogating me about how long I'd been planning to leave her, whether Jason and I had ever been intimate, why I needed friends when I had her. Wednesday, June 12th. I'll never forget that date because it was my sister's birthday, and Veronica had forbidden me from calling her. That morning, she found a text from a number she didn't recognize. It was just my dentist's office confirming an appointment, but the receptionist who sent it was named Ashley, and that was enough. Veronica spent the entire day alternating between crying and rage, accusing me of setting up secret meetings, of using dental appointments as cover stories. She called the dental office 17 times, demanding to speak to Ashley, insisting on seeing security footage from my last visit. Around 4 in the afternoon, she seemed to calm down, apologized for overreacting, and suggested we have dinner at her penthouse that night. She even let me stop at the grocery store alone to pick up ingredients for the pasta dish she liked. Standing in that cereal aisle, holding my phone with no missed calls for the first time in months, I actually considered running, just leaving everything and disappearing. But my car was in her name. My apartment lease had been transferred to her company, and she'd made sure I knew she had connections with every major employer in the city. Dinner at her penthouse that night felt like eating in a museum after closing. Too quiet, too perfect, with shadows in places where light should reach. She'd set the dining table with her grandmother's china, lit 37 candles throughout the room, I counted them to keep my mind busy, and wore this white silk dress that made her look like she was attending her own wedding. She barely touched her food, just kept refilling my wine glass and watching me eat with this intensity that made each bite harder to swallow. When I mentioned needing to use the bathroom, she insisted on walking me there, waiting outside the door, asking if everything was okay every 30 seconds. After dinner, she led me to the living room where she'd arranged dozens of printed screenshots. Every Instagram photo I'd ever liked, every female contact in my phone, every woman I'd served at the bar in the past 6 months that she'd somehow identified and researched. She'd created profiles for each of them, printed on heavy cardstock like baseball cards of people she considered threats. She started with the flight attendant from months ago, reading from her research about the woman's divorce, her 2 kids, her mortgage payments that were 3 months behind. Then came the barista from the coffee shop I used to visit, the woman who cut my hair, my sister's roommate who texted me once about splitting costs for a birthday gift. Each profile included photos she'd pulled from social media, their addresses, their workplaces, their family members' names. Her voice stayed perfectly calm, like she was presenting a quarterly business report. But her hands were trembling so violently that the papers rustled like leaves in a storm. When I stood up to leave, she grabbed a letter opener from her desk, one of those ornate silver ones with her initials engraved on the handle, and pressed it against her own wrist, not mine. Said if I walked out that door, she'd make sure everyone knew what I'd driven her to do, that she'd already written emails to my family explaining how I'd exploited her loneliness, taken her money, pushed her to this point. The emails were scheduled to send in an hour unless she stopped them. That's when I made the mistake of reaching for my phone to call 911. She lunged at me with a speed I didn't know she possessed, and suddenly that letter opener wasn't against her wrist anymore. The pain in my shoulder was sharp and hot, and seeing my blood on her white dress triggered something primal in her. She started laughing, this horrible broken sound, and came at me again. We struggled through that penthouse like some twisted dance, knocking over those 37 candles, shattering her grandmother's china, leaving bloody handprints on her pristine walls. I managed to lock myself in the bathroom, and she spent the next 20 minutes alternating between pounding on the door and sliding apology notes underneath it, each one more deranged than the last. Through the door, I could hear her on the phone with someone, saying there'd been an accident, that her consultant had attacked her, that she needed security immediately. My phone was in the living room. The bathroom window was 40 floors up, and I could hear footsteps in the hallway, multiple sets getting closer. But here's the thing about those luxury penthouses. They have emergency intercoms in the bathrooms, hidden behind the mirror for medical emergencies. I'd noticed it weeks ago when I was looking for her sleeping pills during one of her paranoid episodes. My shoulder was bleeding badly, soaking through my shirt, but I managed to smash the mirror with her ceramic soap dispenser and hit that red button. The 911 operator could hear Veronica screaming through the door about how I'd assaulted her, how she was defending herself, but they also heard me giving my name, my location, describing the stab wound, the letter opener, her psychiatric medications lined up on the counter that I rattled off one by one. The security guards arrived first, and I could hear Veronica's voice shift into victim mode, sobbing about being attacked in her own home. But then the paramedics arrived, then the real police, and they insisted on seeing me despite her protests. The blood trail told a different story than hers. Defensive wounds on my hands, the letter opener with only her fingerprints, those deranged notes she'd slipped under the door that I'd managed to photograph with the bathroom's smart mirror display. They took us both to the hospital in separate ambulances. 16 stitches in my shoulder, countless questions from detectives, a restraining order filed that night. Veronica's lawyer called 18 times before I blocked the number, offering money, threatening lawsuits, promising this would destroy my life. But her other victims started reaching out. 3 former consultants who'd signed NDAs but were willing to testify about their own experiences with her. Turns out I wasn't her first arrangement, just the first one who'd survived long enough to call for help. The criminal case is still pending, but I'm in witness protection of sorts, living in a different state under a victim's assistance program. Some nights I still wake up at 2 a.m. when my bar shifts used to end and check that my doors are locked. The money's gone, obviously, but being broke and alive beats the alternative. I bartend again now, at a little dive bar where nobody orders Hendrick's martinis, and the biggest tip I've gotten is $20. And that's exactly how I like it. My laptop screen glowed in the dark studio apartment while I scrolled through the Sugar Daddy website for the 5th time that night. 23 years old, studying nursing in Columbus, Ohio, and drowning in bills that my waitressing shifts couldn't touch. That's where life had brought me. Every month became a juggling act between textbooks, groceries, and the $100 rent that had doubled since my roommate moved out 2 months earlier to live with her boyfriend. Creating that profile felt like crossing a line I'd drawn for myself years ago. But desperation has a way of erasing boundaries you thought were permanent. Just temporary, I kept telling myself while uploading 3 photos from my Instagram, picking ones where I looked sophisticated at a friend's wedding. My bio claimed I enjoyed wine tasting and art galleries, 2 things I'd never actually done but figured men on this site would want to hear. Within an hour, 47 messages flooded my inbox, most of them vulgar, direct propositions that made my skin feel dirty just reading them. But one message stood out, from a man whose profile photo showed him on what appeared to be a yacht, wearing a tailored Navy suit that probably cost more than my entire year's tuition. Richard's message read differently than the others. No mention of my body, no crude suggestions, just genuine interest in my nursing studies and an invitation to lunch. 51 years old, owned several medical equipment distribution companies across the Midwest, and wrote with perfect grammar, which somehow mattered to me in that moment. He suggested meeting at a steakhouse downtown the following Saturday, the kind of place with valet parking and leather-bound menus without prices. Richard had already arrived when I walked in wearing my only nice dress, a black piece I'd bought for job interviews, and he stood to greet me like we were old friends, not strangers from a transactional website. Silver hair styled precisely, a Rolex catching the light, teeth so white they seemed unnatural against his golf course tan. Everything about him screamed money in a way that both attracted and repelled me. The waiter knew him as Mr. Hawthorne, pulled out my chair, and Richard ordered for both of us without asking my preference, selecting a ribeye that arrived perfectly pink and vegetables I couldn't even pronounce. Throughout lunch, he asked about my studies, my family back in small-town Indiana, and when I finally admitted my financial struggles, he simply smiled and said we could work something out that benefited us both. After lunch, Richard walked me to my beat-up Honda Accord and handed me an envelope without any ceremony, just pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers around it. "For your textbooks," he said, then kissed my cheek with lips that felt papery and cold. Inside the envelope was $2,000 in crisp $100 bills, more cash than I'd ever held at once, and a handwritten note with his phone number that said, "Dinner Friday," in elegant cursive. My hands trembled as I counted the money 3 times in my car, part of me wanting to drive straight back and return it, another part already calculating how this would cover rent, groceries, and the pathology textbook I'd been sharing with a classmate. I texted him yes that night, and by Friday afternoon a package arrived at my apartment. A red cocktail dress from Nordstrom with the tag still on, $400, along with matching heels and a note specifying he'd pick me up at 7. The dress fit perfectly, even though I'd never told him my size, which should have bothered me more than it did at the time. Dinner happened at his penthouse apartment in the tower downtown, 32nd floor with windows overlooking the entire city. He'd cooked himself, salmon with some kind of glaze, asparagus, and wine that he said came from his personal collection in Napa. Richard talked about his divorce 5 years ago, how his ex-wife got the house in Dublin, but he preferred city living anyway, and mentioned his 2 adult sons who worked in his companies but rarely called. After the 3rd glass of wine, he moved closer on the leather couch, running his fingers through my hair while describing trips he wanted to take me on. Vegas, Miami, maybe even Paris if things went well between us. His touch felt possessive rather than gentle, the way someone might handle an expensive object they'd just purchased. And when he kissed me, his tongue tasted like wine and something metallic. That night he gave me another envelope, $3,000 this time, and made it clear he expected me to be available when he wanted to see me, usually twice a week, sometimes more. For 2 months, the arrangement worked exactly as Richard wanted it to. He'd text me at random hours, sometimes midnight, sometimes during my morning classes, and expect responses within minutes. If I didn't reply fast enough, he'd call repeatedly until I answered. His voice always calm, but with an edge that made my chest tighten. He bought me a new iPhone because mine was embarrassing, installed some kind of tracking app for safety, and would question me if I went anywhere unusual. My grades actually improved because suddenly I could afford all my textbooks, quit one of my waitressing shifts, and focus on studying. But Richard started showing up at places without warning. The coffee shop where I studied, the gym near campus, even outside my apartment at odd hours just to check in. He'd introduced me to his business associates as his girlfriend, though we'd never discussed being exclusive, and got visibly angry when a male classmate texted about a study group while we were at dinner. Everything shifted the night I told him I couldn't see him that weekend because of midterms. His face went completely still, like a mask had dropped, and he set down his wine glass so carefully it didn't make a sound. "I don't think you understand how this works," he said, voice eerily quiet. "I've invested a lot in you. Your rent, your education, your entire lifestyle now depends on me. You think you can just decide when you're available?" He stood up from the couch, walked to his home office, and came back with a folder containing copies of every check he'd given me, receipts for every gift, even screenshots of our text messages. Apparently, he'd been documenting everything from day one, creating what he called insurance to make sure I understood my position. He calmly explained how easy it would be to tell my nursing school about my side business, how disappointed my parents back in Indiana would be to learn how their daughter was paying for college. The threat was clear without him having to raise his voice once. After that night, I became his puppet on a financial string, answering every text within seconds, showing up whenever he demanded, smiling through dinners where he'd grip my thigh under the table hard enough to leave bruises. He started choosing my clothes, transferring money directly into my account but monitoring every purchase I made, questioning a $5 coffee or asking why I needed tampons when I'd just bought them 3 weeks ago. My friend Megan noticed the designer bags, the new laptop, but also the way I'd jump whenever my phone buzzed, how I'd cancel plans last minute with weak excuses. Richard wanted me to move into a luxury apartment closer to his penthouse, already had the lease ready, said he'd handle everything, but I knew accepting meant losing the last bit of independence I had left. During sex, which had become more frequent and increasingly rough, he'd whisper about how he owned me, how no one else would ever want someone who sold themselves, how lucky I was that he chose to take care of me. He'd leave marks on purpose, hickeys and bruises in visible places, his way of branding me so everyone would know I belonged to someone. The breaking point came in early May when I met someone at the hospital during my clinical rotation. Brian was a second-year resident, only 28, with messy brown hair and kind eyes that crinkled when he laughed at my nervous jokes. We bonded over terrible hospital coffee and the chaos of 12-hour shifts, and for the first time in months, I remembered what it felt like to have someone look at me like a person instead of a purchase. Brian asked me to grab breakfast after a particularly brutal night shift, nothing romantic, just eggs and pancakes at a 24-hour diner near the hospital. But Richard had been tracking my phone and saw I'd been at an unusual location for 2 hours. The confrontation that evening was volcanic. He threw a wine glass against his apartment wall, screaming about disrespect and betrayal, demanding to know who I was whoring myself out to now. When I tried to leave, he blocked the door, grabbed my wrist so hard something popped, and said if I walked out he'd make sure I never finished nursing school, that he'd destroy my life so thoroughly I'd wish I'd never met him. But I left anyway. Ran out when he went to the bathroom, drove straight to Megan's apartment with nothing but my purse and the clothes I was wearing. She took one look at my wrist, already swelling and turning purple, and drove me to the emergency room where x-rays showed a minor fracture. The nurse who treated me had seen this before, slipped me a domestic violence pamphlet, offered to call the police, but I was too terrified of Richard's threats about nursing school to file a report. For a week, I stayed at Megan's place, ignored the hundreds of calls and texts from Richard that ranged from apologetic to threatening to desperate. He sent flowers to my apartment, to the hospital where I did clinicals, even somehow got them delivered to my parents' house in Indiana, with a note saying their daughter was confused and needed help. He emailed my nursing school advisor claiming to be a concerned family friend, worried about my mental health and dangerous lifestyle choices, though thankfully she didn't take him seriously. Brian kept asking me out for coffee, and eventually I said yes, desperate for something normal and kind even though I knew Richard would find out. He always did. Our first real date was supposed to be simple, just mini golf and ice cream on a Sunday afternoon in early June. Brian picked me up in his ancient Toyota Corolla that rattled when it idled, such a contrast to Richard's pristine BMW, and for 3 hours I actually forgot about the mess my life had become. We laughed at how terrible we both were at mini golf, shared a banana split like teenagers, and when he kissed me goodbye, it was soft and asked permission first. But when I got back to my apartment, the door was already cracked open, the wood frame splintered where someone had forced it. Richard was sitting on my couch like he belonged there, still wearing his golf clothes from that morning, drinking whiskey from one of my coffee mugs. The apartment reeked of his cologne, that expensive stuff that used to make me feel special, but now made me want to vomit. "Did you have fun with your little boyfriend?" he asked, swirling the whiskey like we were having a casual conversation. On the coffee table, he'd spread out printed photos, screenshots from Brian's social media, his work schedule at the hospital, even his parents' home address in Dayton. "You think you can replace me with some broke resident who drives a piece of shit car?" Richard stood up, walked toward me slowly, and I backed against the wall near my kitchen. "After everything I've done for you, the money, the clothes, pulling you out of your pathetic little life?" His face was red, veins visible on his forehead, nothing like the composed businessman I'd met months ago. He grabbed my shoulders, shook me hard enough that my head hit the wall, and started describing exactly what he'd do to Brian, how easy it would be to get him fired, maybe plant drugs in his locker, or perhaps something more direct involving his car's brake lines. The threats poured out of him like poison, each one more horrific than the last, and I realized this wasn't about wanting me anymore. It was about not letting anyone else have me. When he finally paused to take a breath, I did the only thing I could think of and screamed as loud as possible, over and over, until my throat felt raw. My neighbor, an elderly woman named Dorothy who'd lived there for 30 years, started banging on the wall, yelling that she was calling 911. Richard's whole demeanor changed the second he heard Dorothy mention police. The rage dissolved into cold calculation. He straightened his polo shirt, picked up his whiskey, and walked to the door like nothing had happened. "This isn't over," he said quietly, then left just as we heard sirens in the distance. The police took my statement, photographed the broken door frame and my bruised shoulders, and said they'd file a report but couldn't arrest him without more evidence. I filed for a restraining order the next morning with Brian beside me at the courthouse, his hand steady on my back while mine shook signing the papers. Richard violated it exactly once, 3 weeks later, showing up at the hospital parking garage to leave a single envelope on my windshield with $10,000 cash and a note, "For your silence." I took the money to the police station immediately, evidence of the violation, and this time they arrested him at his penthouse that same night. He got 6 months in county jail, lost his medical supply contracts with the hospital system after word spread, and last I heard, moved to Florida, where his older son lives. I graduated nursing school debt-free thanks to his money, which feels like the only justice I'll get from the whole nightmare. Brian and I are still together, living in a little rental house with a security system he insisted on installing, and every time a BMW drives by too slowly, my heart still races even though I know Richard is 800 miles away. My last year of college was hectic in ways I hadn't expected, juggling classes, a part-time job, and the constant stress of what would come after graduation. Money was always tight, and I made choices I never thought I'd even consider. That's how I ended up agreeing to meet a man through an arrangement site. He was older, polished, and promised nothing more than conversation over dinner at a high-end restaurant. It didn't sound dangerous. Honestly, at that point in my life, it felt like a small risk for some stability. The dinner itself was almost too normal. His name was Daniel, mid-40s, expensive watch glinting every time he raised his glass. The restaurant smelled of roasted garlic and leather seats polished with care, the kind of place I'd never walk into on my own. He asked about my classes, laughed at my sarcastic comments, and ordered for both of us like he'd done it 1,000 times. I remember thinking he seemed practiced, like he'd taken other girls here before. Still, nothing about the night felt threatening, until it came time to leave. When I pulled out my phone to call a rideshare, Daniel waved it off with a chuckle. He leaned across the table, saying he'd never forgive himself if he let me ride home alone that late at night. His voice carried the kind of authority that didn't leave room for argument, but I still hesitated. I'd learned to trust my instincts, and something about the insistence nagged at me. He promised it was just to drop me off safely, and against my better judgment, I followed him to the sleek black sedan parked by the valet stand. The car smelled faintly of cedar and something chemical, maybe a strong cleaning product. The leather seats were cold against my skin as I buckled in. At first, he drove like anyone else, smooth, cautious, making small talk about the city lights flickering past the windshield. I remember staring at the digital dashboard clock, relieved that it wasn't too late. But when we reached the intersection where he should have turned toward my apartment, he kept going. The locks clicked down with a sharp mechanical sound, and I realized I couldn't open the door. I tried to laugh it off at first, telling him he'd missed the turn. He didn't respond, just tightened his grip on the steering wheel. The city streets began thinning out, familiar shops and gas stations replaced by warehouses with boarded-up windows. My chest tightened as I asked again where we were going. Daniel's jaw flexed, but he kept his eyes on the road, silent as if my words weren't worth answering. That silence was worse than anything he could have said. I pressed at the lock with my thumb, knowing it was useless, but panic makes you test things anyway. The windows were tinted darker than I realized, making the empty streets outside feel even further away. I considered calling 911, but the thought of him hearing me and snapping before I could explain made my fingers hesitate. Every block we passed, the lighting grew dimmer, fewer signs of life like he had planned this route ahead of time. "Daniel, this isn't the way," I finally said louder than before. My voice cracked, and that's when he turned to look at me for the first time since we left the restaurant. His eyes didn't blink, didn't soften, didn't even acknowledge fear. He just smiled faintly, and then faced the road again, tapping his index finger against the wheel in a steady rhythm. It was deliberate, like a signal meant only for himself. I remember gripping the side of my seat so hard my nails dug into the leather. Then he spoke, and it was almost worse than the silence. "You'll understand soon," he said, calm, as if we were still chatting over dinner. No anger, no rush, just certainty. The car rolled through another intersection, past a flickering streetlight that lit up a rusted chain-link fence and graffiti-tagged buildings. I realized if I didn't act soon, I might not get another chance. The problem was, I had no idea what I could actually do locked in that car with him. My heart pounded so loudly, I thought he could hear it over the hum of the engine. I spotted a red light ahead and realized it might be my only chance. Without thinking twice, I reached into my bag, pulled out the heavy metal keychain I carried, and slammed it against the window. The sound wasn't loud, but it was enough to make him whip his head toward me. His hand shot out like he was about to grab my wrist, but the light turned green at that exact second, and the car behind us honked impatiently. That split moment gave me courage I didn't know I had. I screamed at the top of my lungs, pounding the window with my fists, hoping someone, anyone, would notice. Daniel cursed under his breath, trying to quiet me down, but the distraction caused him to hesitate just long enough for me to hit the unlock button on my side. I hadn't realized it would work while the car was in gear, but somehow the door popped open. I flung myself out before he could stop me, stumbling onto the pavement, skin scraping against the rough asphalt. A couple walking their dog on the corner froze as they saw me tumble into the street. I ran toward them without looking back, gasping for air, shouting that I needed help. Daniel sped off, tires squealing, disappearing into the dark industrial road without another word. His taillights vanished faster than I could process what just happened. The police took my statement, but they couldn't do much with only his first name and a vague profile picture. They told me these kinds of men use fake details all the time, and the car was probably rented. I never saw him again. To this day, I can't step into a stranger's car without feeling my chest tighten, and I've deleted every app that ever made me cross paths with people like him. It was supposed to be a simple dinner. Instead, it became the night I realized how thin the line between safety and danger really is. I was in my second year of college when I met Anthony. At that point in my life, I was constantly balancing late-night study sessions with part-time shifts at a small cafe. Money was always tight, and my idea of a treat was splurging on takeout instead of cooking instant noodles in my dorm's tiny kitchen. Meeting someone like him felt unreal at first. He walked into the cafe one evening wearing a tailored suit that looked like it had been made just for him, polished shoes that caught the light, and a watch I couldn't even begin to price. When he ordered, his tone was calm, deliberate, like every word had been chosen carefully. What caught me off guard wasn't just the way he looked, but how focused he seemed on me. Instead of scrolling through his phone or tapping impatiently like most people did, Anthony actually asked about my classes, how I managed to juggle work and school, and what I wanted for myself in the future. Nobody ever asked me that while I was behind the counter. By the time he left, he had slipped a $100 bill into the tip jar and told me he'd come back soon. That night I lay in bed replaying every detail of our conversation, wondering how someone like him had even noticed me. He returned 2 days later just like he'd said, only this time he didn't just talk, he invited me out to dinner. I tried to laugh it off at first, but he was persistent without being pushy. The way he phrased it, "Let me take you somewhere you'll never forget," made me feel like saying no would mean missing out on something I'd regret forever. We ended up at an upscale restaurant I had only ever seen from the outside. I remember the linen tablecloths, the quiet piano music, the wine list that had no prices printed beside it. He ordered for both of us with such confidence that I felt like I was watching a scene out of a movie. From that night forward, everything escalated quickly. He sent a driver to pick me up for dinners, surprised me with designer handbags that I knew cost more than my tuition, and once even handed me a small box with a necklace inside. The chain so delicate it sparkled under the dim dorm light when I held it up. He always seemed to know the right thing to say, the right gesture to make. When he leaned in close and told me I deserved more than cheap coffee and endless exams, I believed him. For a while it felt like I was living someone else's life, a version where luxury wasn't something I just scrolled past online. One weekend, Anthony invited me to see his place. I expected a nice apartment, maybe something a little bigger than the cramped dorms and rentals most students lived in. Instead, we pulled up to a high-rise downtown, and the doorman greeted him by name. The elevator ride felt endless, the kind where your ears pop halfway up, and when the doors finally opened, I stepped into a penthouse with glass walls overlooking the entire city. The kitchen island was larger than my entire bedroom, and in the corner sat a grand piano that looked untouched but polished daily. He poured us champagne like it was nothing, and I tried to play it cool even though I was shaking inside from disbelief. The thing was, Anthony never seemed to work. Whenever I asked about his job, he'd brush it off with vague answers like consulting or real estate connections. I told myself it didn't matter. He was generous, attentive, and made me feel like the center of his world. But one night, as we left the penthouse for dinner, I noticed a man waiting by the elevator. He wasn't dressed like the polished professionals I was used to seeing in the building. His jacket was bulky, his stare sharp, and when Anthony saw him, he gave the smallest nod before we walked past. It was subtle, but it lingered with me for the rest of the night. A few days later, he offered to let me borrow one of his cars. I laughed, thinking he was joking, until he led me into a private garage and pointed to a sleek black Maserati. The leather still smelled new, and the dashboard lit up like a spaceship when I pressed the start button. I drove it to campus once, and people stared like I was some celebrity's kid. But when I parked, I noticed something odd, a small emblem on the keychain that wasn't Maserati's logo. It looked custom, almost like a family crest, except it had initials engraved that didn't match Anthony's. When I asked about it, he waved it off, saying it was just a gift from friends. His tone that time was different, tighter, and it stuck with me. The real unraveling began when I decided to surprise him. He had left his phone on the kitchen counter while taking a call in another room, and for some reason, my eyes landed on it. I didn't mean to snoop, but a message lit up on the screen. The shipment cleared. Money will be delivered tonight. My chest tightened instantly. When he walked back in, I pretended not to notice, but for the first time since I'd met him, I felt a distance between us. Every gesture that once felt romantic now seemed calculated. Every gift suddenly had weight, like a chain linking me to something I didn't understand. The breaking point came one evening when Anthony insisted we go to a dinner party with friends. We arrived at a private townhouse on the edge of the city, and from the outside it looked normal, almost quiet. Inside, though, the atmosphere was suffocating. Men in dark suits spoke in low voices around a long table, and every time Anthony introduced me, I caught the way their eyes lingered a second too long, like they were sizing me up. There was no laughter, no casual chatter, just sharp glances and coded remarks I couldn't keep up with. I barely touched the food, my fork resting cold in my hand as I tried to piece together what I had stepped into. Later that night, while Anthony was deep in conversation across the room, I excused myself and slipped into the hallway. That's when I saw an office door slightly ajar. Curiosity got the better of me, and I peered inside. Stacks of cash were piled on a desk, wrapped in rubber bands, next to a black duffel bag unzipped just enough to reveal what looked like a gun handle. My throat tightened instantly. Before I could back away, one of the suited men appeared at the other end of the hallway. He didn't say a word, just stared, his jaw clenched. I hurried back to the main room, my pulse hammering, and Anthony's eyes followed me as if he knew exactly what I'd seen. The ride home was silent until Anthony finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost rehearsed. "There are things about me you don't need to know. Trust me, it's better that way." That sentence cemented everything I had been trying to deny. I realized in that moment that the cars, the penthouse, the gifts, none of it was his. It all belonged to something bigger, something dangerous. When we reached my dorm, he kissed my hand like nothing was wrong, but I barely slept that night. My mind kept circling back to the money, the duffel bag, the men at the table. The very next morning, I packed a bag and left campus early. I told him I had to visit family out of town and blocked his number as soon as I was on the bus. For weeks, I avoided the cafe where we met, stopped going near the high-rise, and even switched my routine just in case. He never came after me, at least not that I know of, but the weight of those weeks hasn't left me. Sometimes when I see a luxury car idling too long near the curb, my chest tightens and I wonder if it's connected to him. I've never told anyone in my real life the full story, but writing it here feels like the only way to let it out.